I want to begin with essentially the first year report card for Donald Trump. Yes, it's not yet 1 year into his presidency, but it's 1 year since he was elected president. And I know, it's funny. I've been in this business a long time where we always do a November polls and we always do January polls that essentially are serving as checks. Where are we 1 year from the election? Where are we 1 year from when he took office? So in this case, we are 1 year from the election. And let's look at some basics, if you will, the direction of the country. And this is one of those where and this is a reminder of how a partisan media person would work. Okay, so here's right direction, wrong track. It is 37-61, 37% right track. That is not a great number. That is down from 44%. The first NBC poll of the Trump presidency. So at the start of his presidency, it was a pretty high right track number, considering we've been in what I would call a political recession for most of the century, where a majority of people have consistently said we're on the wrong track. There was just one brief period during the start of Obama's presidency that those two lines were essentially dead even, right track, wrong track. And we've been essentially on the wrong track, really going back since I'd say about a year into the Iraq War, post 9/11. And it has been consistent wrong track, wrong track, wrong track. However, if you wanted to spin the 37% right direction in Donald Trump's direction, you'd say this. Well, 37% of the country says we're in the right direction, 61% the wrong track. That 37%, we haven't been that high since, obviously there was 44% in March, but before then, it hasn't been as high as 37 since going back to the start of COVID in March of 20, when there was a bit of almost rally around the president moment, when everybody was trying to unify for a very brief period on dealing with COVID. You saw that number inch up, and then it dramatically fell down to 19% right direction, 72% wrong track. And that's 70% plus consistent wrong track. Essentially, July of 20 was pretty consistent all the way until the summer of 2024. And still at election day in 2024, we were sitting at 66% wrong track. So you could make the case, if you just wanted to spin this in Trump's direction, hey, there's still more people say we're on the right track than at any time during the Biden presidency, and that would be true. But it's the trend line that you've got to be aware of, where the fact is that it is now directionally going back to what was the norm during the end of Trump's presidency, most of Trump's presidency, and going in to that. So that is a flashing yellow light. 37 is still higher than at any moment in Biden's presidency, but it is 7 points lower than it was at the start of the year. And it does appear, when you see other polling in there, that it is trending downward. Now, here's my favorite aspect of sort of trying to, I've pointed this out to you before, but Donald Trump, in many ways, he can't really move his numbers. The country has made up its mind on Donald Trump. How do I know this? So I went through all of the polling we did on Donald Trump, NBC News did on Donald Trump, from 2017 through 2020. Okay, NBC conducted, I keep saying we, it is not we, it's been a long time since it's we, almost a year now, 39 polls in his first term. All 39 polls. And when you average out his job approval rating in those 39 polls, just average it out, his job approval rating was 43.7%. What is the job approval rating in this latest NBC News poll released this weekend? 43%. His number doesn't budge. His trading range is really small. It has gotten as high as he got 47% was his honeymoon. That was March of 2025. He hit 47% in October of 18 when he got his tax cut passed. And then he's never been over 47 in the NBC poll. He got 47% in February at the start of COVID. It's never been north of 47. Now, his lows were super early in his presidency. He had 39% in April of 18, 39% in January of 18. He was at 38% in October of 17. Other than that, though, he has not visited the 30s. The last time he was in the 30s essentially was April of 18. He has essentially been, and I'll just 44, 45, 46, 44, 44, 47, 46, 43, 43, 46, 43, 46, 44, 45, 43, 45, 40. Am I making my point here? I'm not going to keep going and going and going. But that is just remarkable stability. Okay. That 40, 43% there is, that's the chunk of voters that you know are going to be with the Trump-led Republican Party. And I say Trump-led Republican Party here because there's another interesting question that, again, will depend on how you want to present the question, will kind of give a hint at your partisan perspective if you're not careful. A few other things to note. You are starting to see Donald Trump's favorable rating go back. He, again, had a bit of a honeymoon. He had a 36% positive rating. It was the highest personal positive rating that he had ever recorded. That is already back down to 29 on very positive, which is a lot more in line with where he was most of the campaign year. So he's still better. He still has a better, very positive rating in this second term and from the second campaign than he ever did first. And what that is that's the deepest space, right? The 29% who say they have a very positive view of him, they are with him through thick and thin. It's another 11% say somewhat positive. So you're looking at 40% that just feel very positively about Donald Trump, and his approval rating is 43. So there's just really there's only three. If you just assume that the 40 of the 43 feel very positive about him, it means that there aren't people that don't like him and approve of the job he's doing. There are people that don't like him and approve of his goals of what he's trying to achieve, but they don't like how he's trying to get those goals. And again, this poll features some interesting things that will get us there. But the big headline of this poll really is that generic ballot number. And let me go and it is astonishing that Democrats have an 8-point lead October of 2025. 8-point lead in the generic. Democrats at 50, Republicans at 42. The last time they had gaps anywhere over 5 points, let alone 8, 9, or 10, was in the run-up to the 2018 midterms. So you're almost seeing we are in a repeat. And in fact, Democrats are +8, right? Basically 1 year out from the midterms in the generic ballot. In October of 17, this same point in time, 1 year out from the 2018 midterms, Democrats were up 7 points in the generic ballot. So as you can see, we are trending in it looks like, we are literally having a rerun, right? It's a rerun of the Trump job rating, 43%. The entire first term is 43.7. He's sitting at 43%. 1 year before the midterms in Trump 1.0, Democrats had a 7-point lead in the generic. 1 year before the midterms in Trump 2.0, Democrats have an 8-point lead in the generic. So there's, on one hand, you think, boy, history is repeating itself. But there is one giant difference between 2018, 2017, and 2026 and 2025. And it is the personal favorable rating of the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a positive rating of 37%, negative rating of 46%. The Democratic Party has a positive rating of 28% and a negative rating of 53%. Let me say that again, a negative rating of 53%. They have a 25-point gap, okay, between the positive rating for the Democratic Party and the negative rating for the Democratic Party, 53%. In contrast, the Republican Party's gap is not even double digits. It's 37% positive, 46% negative, just a 9-point negative gap. Donald Trump has a larger negative gap between favorable and unfavorable than the Republican Party does. This is an important nugget here, okay? Because I think this explains the generic ballot gap quite well, and what the voter is what we're likely seeing with the swing voter. And again, this is really going to go well. What you're hearing with these polling numbers that I'm delivering to you is going to really does sort of coincide really well with the conversations you're going to hear from Rich Tao, the qualitative research, focus group stuff versus the quantitative that I'm giving you right now. But that massive gap, and just to give you an idea of where we were in October of 2017. Okay, at this point, the most recent numbers I can look at here, December of 2017. The net favorable rating of the Democratic Party was 33%. The net negative was 38%. Okay, so just a 5-point gap. Just a 5-point gap. It's now, again, that was a 5-point gap, essentially 1 year out from the 2018 midterms. Look, we know the whole country has a net negative view of both parties. Okay, that we know that a majority of this country doesn't like either political party. But you had a 5-point gap at this point in time in 2017 on the Democratic Party favorable to unfavorable ratio. It is a 25-point gap now. Now, let me tell you the Republican number so you can get some clarity on that. Republicans net in 2017, they were sitting at 29.45. Okay, essentially 1 year out, 29.45. That is a 16-point gap. Here they are with an improved Republican Party rating this time where their gap is only 9 points less than 10. So Donald Trump hasn't changed, but the Democratic Party has changed and the Republican Party has changed. But what's interesting is that there appears to be a group of voters that feel more favorably to the Republican Party than they do Donald Trump. Now, you would say, that should lead to some interesting decisions by Republicans who maybe want to be seeking re-election in 2026, only are going to be dealing with 2 more years of Trump and maybe want to seek distance. And of course, then you look at that base vote and the devotion to Donald Trump that I showed you, where essentially to love Donald Trump is to approve of his job, and they're the most important chunk of Republican primary voters. So even though a majority of this country has a lot more preference to generic Republican ideas versus generic Democratic ideas versus Donald Trump, right now, you can see that the voters view the generic ballot question not as a discussion between which party do you like better, the Democrats or the Republicans. That is not the question. The reason the Democrats have a large 8-point lead is that the question that voters are deciding between is, do you want Donald Trump? Do you want there to be a check on Donald Trump? And right now, there is a huge desire for a check on Donald Trump. Here's something that was fascinating that surprises me. The democracy issue didn't really work very well in 20. Didn't work very well in 22. I know there's a whole bunch of Biden people that want to spin that it did. That was not why they won in 20. And in 2022, it is hard to see that they won that way. It was a disastrous Republican nominees that allowed Democrats to not do as poorly as they could have done in a normal environment. Kamala Harris closed with the democracy question. And yet those swing voters weren't moved by the democracy question because in their minds, they weren't electing a different Donald Trump for Trump 2.0. In their mind, they were electing a continuation of Trump 1.0. But Trump 2.0 is not popular. There's a reason results matter more than promises. Just like there's a reason Morgan & Morgan has become America's largest injury law firm. For the last 35 years, they've recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. It includes cases where insurance companies offered next to nothing, short of shortchanging, seeing if they could get away with it. And Morgan & Morgan fought back, and they won millions. In Pennsylvania, one client was awarded $26 million. It was a staggering 40 times the amount that the insurance company originally offered. That offer, $650,000, whatever it took to sort of get away without paying. So with more than 1,000 lawyers across the country, Morgan & Morgan knows how to deliver for everyday people. So if you're injured, you're looking for a lawyer, check out forthepeople.com/ToddCast or dial pound law, pound 529 on your cell phone. And remember, all law firms are not the same. So give Morgan & Morgan a look. Their fee is free unless they win. And listen to this. I'm going to read you the full question. When it comes to deciding your vote for Congress next year, please tell me if each of the following is the single most important issue in deciding how you will vote, a very important issue, or only somewhat important. The single most important issue to hit was protecting constitutional rights. Number 2 was protecting democracy. Number 3 was cost of living. And so that Okay, healthcare was number 4 at 10. I'm trying really hard to find an issue that benefits Donald Trump. Okay, number 4 was healthcare premiums. Number 5 was dealing with the political violence in America. Okay, maybe that's possible. That's a possible net to Trump. It's possible voters on both sides of the aisle see the other party at fault there. Immigration and border security is also down there. Sort of healthcare, political violence, immigration and border security, all sat around the same when you did the single most important. What's interesting is that in 2018, the top 2 issues on the single most important were healthcare and immigration. Here, the top 2 issues are protecting constitutional rights and protecting democracy, which one might argue is the same thing. So do you end up combining those numbers? So you essentially have half of respondents in some form or another picking some form of the structure of the democracy that really irritates them. So now when you see that that is the number 1 and number 2 issue, I've given you the fact that the Democratic Party is more unpopular than Donald Trump and more unpopular than the Republican Party. And yet Democrats are winning the generic ballot by 8 points. Folks don't like how Donald Trump is running roughshod over the presidency. Let me give you a few more questions to give you a little bit more issues on this. So, for instance, they did a great question here. They said, thinking about President Trump and his administration, when it comes to the following issues, is the Trump administration living up to your expectations or has it fallen short? And they tested 6 issues: border security, foreign policy, changing business as usual in Washington, the economy, looking out for the middle class, and inflation and the cost of living. A majority believe that the Trump administration is so far 1 year from the election, has so far fallen short. 53% say they've fallen short on foreign policy. 56% on changing business as usual in Washington. Huge red flag there. That's all those crypto deals and all this sort of, pay to play issues. 63% say he's fallen short in the economy. That is a huge driver in here. People do not like this economy, and you can feel it in this poll. 65% say he's fallen short in looking out for the middle class. Rut-row, Mr. Trump. And 66% say that he's fallen short on inflation and cost of living. Just one issue. Do a majority believe he has lived up to the expectations that they had for his presidency? And I'm sure all of you can guess the issue because I haven't said it yet. It is border security and immigration. 51% say he's lived up to expectations on that. And that, boy, does that tell you a lot. And to indicate how much more trouble Trump and the Republicans are with the economy, they did an issue test between the two parties. Republicans lead on border security by 31 points. They lead on dealing with crime by 22 points. They lead on dealing with immigration by 18 points. On the economy, in September of 2023, Republicans led by 21 points between the two parties. And now their lead is 1 point. This is the worst showing for the Republicans on this issue of the economy since, you guessed it, 2017 to 2018 in the run-up to the first midterm of Donald Trump. So as you can see, more importantly, on the issue of protecting constitutional rights, 8-point advantage for Democrats on this. On the issue of protecting democracy, 11-point advantage for Democrats on this. We asked those same 2 questions in September of 2023. Republicans had an 8-point lead on the protecting our constitutional rights issue, and Republicans had a 1-point lead on protecting democracy. Both of those issues are moving towards the Democrats. Now, some of this is natural. The party out of power is seen as the one more likely to stand up for constitutional rights than the party in power. Most people assume the party in power is always looking for loophole or trying to erode rights. Those that are upset feel as if the party out of power is the one that actually cares about the Constitution. And you could argue that we've seen this, right? Members of Congress care more about the Constitution when they're in the minority in either the House or the Senate than they do when they're in the majority. How do we know this? Just look at all the Republicans staying silent on the unconstitutional way that Donald Trump is conducting his war against Venezuela. Because that's what he's doing right now. They have essentially declared war with Venezuela without going to Congress, without getting, with it. Now they claim shouldn't even be subject to the War Powers Act. The lack of interest among most of congressional Republicans in protecting the Constitution on this issue, I think what's happening. It's not one issue here. It's a collection of it, right? He keeps losing in court. So there's usually a headline about once a week where the federal courts say Trump violated the Constitution or the Trump administration violated the Constitution. Maybe it's on National Guard troops. Maybe it's on what they've been doing with tariffs, right? But and it does seem as if every week, and these headlines, if you look at this poll, and in some ways, do I wish NBC News would do the Heart, Mac, and Truth poll once a month? Yes, that was the pace with which we did it back when we were a news organization that was a lot bigger and going a lot big. Obviously, they're in a different. All of the legacy media companies are in a different place and don't want to spend the money that they once did. But interestingly, doing this poll, having a 6-month gap, you can see the bigger shifts, right? They're brighter. It's not the slow erosion. You see the you see the bright lines. And here's one more question. If you're not sure, if you think I'm reading too much into the issue of democracy and constitutional rights, let me just show you this one last question. Compared to past presidents, do you think Donald Trump has done more to protect the U.S. Constitution, done more to undermine the U.S. Constitution, or he's been no different than past presidents? 31% said he's done more to protect. Remember, that's the super core base. 52% say he's done more to undermine. Just 16% say he's no different than past presidents. 52%. Anytime you see a majority, I've shown you how unpopular the Democratic Party is. To me, anytime I see numbers in 50 plus, it means a majority of whatever that number is what the independent split is. And it means self-described independents are uncomfortable with this. And this is, I think, so you've got an economy that isn't working for a lot of people. Again, how do we know this? 61% say their family's income is falling behind when it comes to cost of living issues. Only 6% say their income's going up faster. Only 31% saying they're breaking even. So you have nearly 2/3 of the country say they're falling behind. You got a majority of the country saying the president's undermining the Constitution. You can now see the picture where an unpopular opposition party can then be successful in the midterms because we continue the same cycle we've been in, arguably, since the second Obama term, which is we continue to vote out what we don't like, and we vote in unknowns. We're willing to try something different if something's being pitched differently. We're sometimes willing to try the same thing again, but this time with a different face. So instead of Speaker Pelosi, this time it may be Speaker Jeffries. Maybe that'll change things, right? But we continue to vote out. We are not voting in anything. We are not voting in ideas. We are throwing out. That is what 2016 was about. It was what 2014 was about, what 2016 was about, what 2018 was about, what 2020 was about, what 2022 was about, what 2024 was about. Yes, I'm repeating all of those years to make this point and drive it home. And here we go again. Everything is being set up here. Now, this doesn't mean Democratic success in the midterms is automatically going to mean they should be the favorite going into the general election in 2028. But what you see developing here is you have people don't like Trump's presidency. They don't like how he's conducting himself. That is a huge issue. That is accruing to the benefit of the Democrats, even though they don't necessarily have much confidence in the Democrats. They prefer the Republicans on a lot of law and order issue, right? As I was just detailing. So the challenge, so if you're a presidential candidate and you're reading this poll, your challenge is you're going to have to come up with a positive vision. You can run against Trump and be negative and succeed in a midterm. You can do it and succeed in a California referendum in order to get voter permission to redraw maps, change the Constitution, and get them to do that. But it's why I don't say this automatically translates to Gavin Newsom being the front runner to become the next president, because we are going to want, I think particularly a Democratic nominee is going to have to demonstrate that they want to try something different, that they're not going to be a stereotype Democrat that the voter seems to have in mind. Now, it's up to you, presidential candidate X, Y, or Z, or presidential candidate Josh Shapiro, Andy Shapiro, Wes Moore, whoever else is going to jump into this thing. You're going to have to find out, and this is what's going to make the Rich Tao conversation, I think, so fruitful here, and really sort of help you take what I just told you and the hard numbers here and the quantitative research and be able to understand sort of why these swing voters are behaving this way. And and ultimately, the best politicians know you got to speak to the swing voters first. Yes, in some ways, the base is going to be easy to fire up. Donald Trump is always taking the easy way out. So he just governs to the base, caters to the base because it keeps a high floor. It protects him politically, right? It keeps him just strong enough to avoid getting thrown out of office, to avoid getting thrown out of, and and ultimately because on cultural issues, the Democratic Party clearly is just so out of sync with where the country is. It's clear to me that between that and I think some angry independents who blame the Democrats for the second Trump term. All right. I certainly think that Joe Biden, I think one of the worst comments Gavin Newsom made recently that I think is going to come back to bite him is when he said that the Biden presidency was terrific. You're not going to win swing voters making the case that Biden's presidency was terrific. It may age well, but it's going to age well the way Harry Truman's presidency aged well. It took 30 years before people decided he had a good presidency. It did not happen in 2, 4, or 6 years. Adlai Stevenson wasn't running on the good old days of Harry Truman. And if he did, he was going to lose anyway to an American war hero named General Eisenhower. So I would just, and so when he said that, I don't think Gavin Newsom understands that there's a whole bunch of middle of the road voters who simply wanted one thing from Joe Biden's presidency: to move the country in a direction so they didn't go back to Donald Trump. And the fact that Donald Trump is back, there's always going to be a chunk of voters that say it's Joe Biden's fault. His presidency wasn't good enough. He didn't leave soon enough. Whatever it is, there's going to be different subjective reasons for it. But ultimately, whether it's his policies, whether it was the way he messaged or didn't message, staying in the race too long, all of those things, right? And that's why I think it is. I don't know if being pro Joe Biden is good in a Democratic primary either, for what it's worth. So I admire the loyalty if he just did it for loyalty purposes. But this is not where the voters are. This is not where the voters are at all. In fact, I think you can thank Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries, the three of them together, for the Democrats' giant net negative problem. By the way, none of these numbers are good for Jeffries and Schumer inside the Democratic Party. Because even though you have a good number of the generic ballot for Democrats, it shows Democrats, the winning Democrats are going to be running against Washington, running against the old leadership of the Democratic Party. And yes, Hakeem Jeffries, you're going to be considered part of the establishment, not part of the new wave of leaders, not unless you figure out a way to break out of this. And I don't know if you can. I think it's hard. I think it's difficult. And certainly it seems as if you've been a bit risk averse in trying to establish yourself as different from Schumer. But there's no doubt if Jeffries is going to have a chance at being seen as a new leader of the party, he's got to figure out how to separate himself from Schumer. Or Schumer's going to have, at some point, do the party a favor and indicate that, he doesn't want to coach next year, to put this in coaching terms, since that's the coin of the realm these days. So with that, there's where America is at, what they think of the two parties, what they think of this presidency, where we're at 1 year from the second election of Donald Trump, 1 year in with our off-year elections coming Tuesday. Don't forget the Election Night live stream on YouTube, on X, wherever you find me, wherever you find Decision Desk HQ, wherever you find Saliza. We will be in all of those places simultaneously. It's an election live stream for true political professionals and political junkies. This is where it's happening. Go check it out. In fact, this poll has indicated more people watch YouTube than legacy television now. Just think of that. That's according to an NBC News poll. Their own numbers, NBC is indicating more people will watch YouTube before they watch legacy TV.